Andariki Namaskaram. Nenu Shefali Vaidya, and I'm going to take you on a journey on the warp and weft of India. But before that, you guys are from Telangana, a state which has a wonderful history of hand-woven textiles. So I would like to ask you, can you name any three of Telangana's iconic textiles? Anybody? I hear Pochampalli and Gadwal and Narayanpet, Golabama from Siddipet. There are multiple weaves, and it's not just unique to Telangana alone. You take any state of India and you will find that every state has its own iconic weaves. Therefore, to understand Bharat's history is to understand the history of Bharat's textiles. Because the history of Bharat's textiles closely mirrors the history of Bharat. Just as Bharat was once prosperous, just as because of that prosperity, Bharat attracted invaders and plunderers, and Bharat went through a very rough period of destruction and plunder, and now Bharat is slowly reclaiming its space in the sun. Bharat is reclaiming its position as Vishwaguru. Just like that, the history of Indian textiles follows a similar track. Let's go on this journey. I was 10 years old when I saw this beautiful painting. It is in the cave number 1 of Ajanta. This is, of course, a restored photograph. But when you stand in front of the painting, as I stood as a 10-year-old, and I gazed in that dim, diffused light of the cave and looked at the Buddha's serene face, he is the Padmapani Bodhisattva, and I looked at his Kativastra, at the cloth that he was wearing around his waist, and I saw this beautiful pattern, this beautiful checkerboard pattern in white, black, and red. And it fascinated me. I did not know it then, but it was one defining memory of my life that basically started my fascination with India's textiles. Years later, when I visited a weaving cluster in a place called Barpalli, which is near Sambalpur in Odisha, and I visited the house of Kalabati and Bhagwana Meher, and I saw them weave the exact same pattern in the exact same colors. Today, after COVID, we talk a lot about work from home. We talk a lot about home office. We talk a lot about work-life balance. But I could see it at work in this small house in a small village in Odisha. Both the husband and wife were national award-winning weavers, and they were continuing their work inside their home. The loom was in the living room. There was a grandchild playing nearby. The grandmother was working and looking after the grandchild. The grandfather was weaving, and he was going in and out, meeting people, going to the market, getting some stuff, come. And all this was going on in a very harmonious manner. It was like meditation, seeing them both work. And what amazed me is that the fabric that they were weaving was exactly like the fabric I had seen on the Padmapani Bodhisattva in the exact same colors. The base was white, and the checkerboard pattern, or the Pasapalli pattern as they call it, was in red and black. 2,000 years. 2,000 years almost separated the Padmapani Buddha and the cloth that was being woven in 2014 or 2015 in this small village in Odisha. So much has happened in those 2,000 years. So many kingdoms came, so many kingdoms went. So many invaders came to India. There was so much of destruction happening. There were so many disruptions happening. But this traditional knowledge was passed on from father to son, from mother to daughter, and it had continued unbroken. And these were the unbroken strands of tradition that really fascinated me. Long before the Buddha was born, long before any of our epics were composed, long before the birth of Christianity and Islam, we had a civilization in India that not only knew how to cultivate cotton and flax, they knew how to spin yarns from it. They knew how to color those yarns, they knew how to weave those yarns into textiles, and they knew how to decorate those textiles using motifs. How do we know that? Because while we did excavations in the Sindhu Saraswati civilization sites of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, which are now in today's Pakistan, and also in Rakhigadi, which is in today's India, we have found strands of cotton yarn, and we have found many tools like spindles, like loom weights, like whorls, which are used in weaving. So we know that the Sindhu civilization era people knew all of these things. This is a very, very famous artifact. Can anybody tell me who this is? Yes, he is a priest king from the Harappa excavations. He is in the museum in Pakistan. But if you see what he's wearing around his upper torso, his uttariya, you will see that he's wearing a shawl which is decorated with a trefoil pattern. That pattern you still see in block prints all over India today. And that pattern, we don't know whether it was woven or embroidered or block printed, but we know that that pattern still exists almost in all states of India where textiles are woven. This is the murti, terracotta murti of the mother goddess, and you can see that she is wearing the kativastra, the same kativastra that you have seen on the Padmapani Bodhisattva. And that kativastra also shows that not only did our people knew how to weave, they also knew how to fashion garments from those textiles. This is the famous Darganj Yakshi, where you can see that the fashion has progressed so much that now people were draping very stylistic drapes, and the clothing had developed from the uttariya, that is the covering the top part of the torso, to the bottom part of the torso, which is known as the antariya, where you can see it's very stylistically, very beautifully draped. And there was something known as a kaya bandha, which you can see here. It is a belt that was used to hold the lower garment together. And that is tied in a very beautiful way. Today we talk a lot about draped garments, but our people knew many different ways of draping the garments. This is a painting from Ajanta, a recreation of it. And if you look very carefully in this dates back almost to 2nd century CE. And if you look back into this, you see that many of the fabric styles and the weaves that are in existence today in India are exhibited here. The lady who is dancing, her sleeves have bandhani work, which you can still see in Gujarat and Rajasthan. If you see the skirts of the women around, you will see that they are wearing different kinds of ikats. The kinds of ikats that are still woven today in Pochampalli, still woven today as Telia Rumals, still woven today in Gujarat, still woven today in Odisha. The same pattern, the same fabric, similar styles. Then we come to was during the Sindhu Saraswati civilization. During the Vedic era, even though we don't find any actual artifacts, the literature abounds in terms related to weaving. Terms like sutra, meaning thread, terms like tantra, which is the actual act of weaving a cloth, terms like prabandha, terms like guna, are all terms which are now used to describe very, very complex philosophical concepts. Like tantra is a philosophy, but tantra is also the technique of weaving. So intertwined weaving was with our philosophy and our religion that you cannot take one out of the other. Even today, when there is a marriage being fixed between a boy and a girl, what does the girl or the boy get as a gift? What's the first thing they get? They get a new article of clothing, right? They either get a sari or a dhoti or something, because that is a part and parcel of our culture, of our philosophy, the respect for hand-woven textiles. When we do puja, when we do Shodashopachara puja, even in our homes, when we do Ganapati puja, when we do Varalakshmi puja, one of the important upacharas that we offer to the god and goddess is actually the offering of vastram. We don't sometimes we offer a full proper sari or a dhoti, or sometimes we just offer a little bit of cotton vastram as a representation. That is because cotton or karpas is very much a part and parcel of our tradition. So much so that the Roman word for cotton, korbasino, came from karpas, which was the Sanskrit word. Weaving as a profession, weaving as an art, weaving as a craft was so popular and was such a prestigious profession in India that when Kautilya wrote his Arthashastra, he wrote that weavers should have autonomous guilds. And even if the king has to buy some cloth, he cannot just go to a weaver's house and demand. He has to offer certain niceties. There is got to be a certain to be followed. The weaver has to be given proper gifts, and only then the king can ask for the cloth. There was respect. There was money, of course, but there was a lot of respect for the weaver's craft. And that is something that was unique to India. With the advent of Islamic invasions, that changed. Because what the Islamic invasions did was that they destroyed the autonomy of the weavers' guilds. Weavers became daily wage workers. They started working for a yajman, or they started working for one person who would establish a workshop. It could be a nobleman, it could be a royal household, it could be somebody, or it could just be a businessman. And all the weavers would exclusively work for that one yajman, and they would do only patterns that they suggested, and they were not given the freedom to sell or weave whatever they wanted. So that was a big setback. But having said that, because the Islamic invaders and the Islamic kings and the noblemen, they were also very fond of good clothing, the weavers were never short of money. In fact, there were new design interventions. Because of the Islamic aversion to animal motifs, the motifs in the textiles became more floral, became more geometric, became more abstract. There were invention of textiles like mashru and himru, which was silk on the outside and cotton on the inside because of certain spiritual regulations that the Islamic rulers wanted. Brocades became a big thing. Banaras was always a good weaving cluster, always a very famous weaving cluster. So much so that when the Buddha achieved Mahaparinirvana, it is said that his body was covered with fine textiles which were woven in Kashi. But after the Islamic rule, Kashi became a very famous center for brocades. So fashion changed, influences changed. And as you can see in this Mughal painting, how they wore different kinds of clothing and how the fashion changed. But the weavers still were very rich, and they were still respected as skilled workers, even though they did not have the autonomy. Megasthenes, who had come as an ambassador to Chandragupta Maurya's court, he had written that people of India, they wear brightly colored robes which are embroidered in gold, and they are wrought of finest muslin. How different is it from today's Indian wedding? You see women wearing brightly colored saris, right, which have a lot of jari work and which are made of very fine cotton and silk. And Megasthenes wrote this in almost 2000 years ago. The more things change, the more they remain the same. It is this beauty of continuity that is the story of India's weaves. So here you can see, this is a British engraving of a weaver working on a pit loom, which is the most basic kind of loom found even today in India. And this is a contemporary picture. And as you can see, the pit loom and even the way the weaver is dressed is pretty much the same as I have shown you in the lithograph. And pit looms like this exist in all parts of the country even today. So what happened? Why were our weavers who enjoyed so much of prestige, who enjoyed so much of economic power, who made such fine textiles in silk, in cotton, in wool, in wild silk, how did they get, poor, sad little weaver story? What happened? The British rule happened. So till about 16th century, India was still producing the finest textiles in the world. So much so that the Portuguese travelers and the European travelers that came to India up till the 16th century have mentioned that everywhere they went, they met noblemen and elite of those countries, whether it's Southeast Asia, whether it's Europe, whether it's the Roman civilization, and they were finest cloth or the finest textiles that were woven by Indian weavers. They were so much in demand, the Indian textiles, that there's a Roman historian called Pliny the Elder who has written in the 1st century CE that the Roman women are so crazy about textiles that are made in India that all the money of Rome is going to India and Rome is becoming poorer. Sounds familiar? In the 70s and 80s, all the Indians used to hanker for foreign-made cloth, imported jeans, imported saris. This was the position that India was in one point of time, where everybody said we want cloth or we want textiles that were woven in India. So till about 17th century, India exported 300 lakh meters of cloth to Europe. And they constituted this textile, this exports, constituted more than 90 different varieties of cotton and silk. But by 1850, the trade had completely died out. So what happened? What happened was what we studied in history books. England started machine-made cloth factories in Manchester. And they bought cotton from India at cheap prices. They forced the Indian farmers to plant indigo because they were crazy about indigo dyes. They copied Indian designs and they started replicating them on machines at a much cheaper rate, obviously, in England. And they started dumping those goods at an amazingly cheap rate in India and in the rest of the world. So India's textiles, which were very beautiful, very finely wrought, very beautifully done, they started becoming too expensive for most people. Also coupled with the famine, the Great Indian Famine, that was the hardest on the farmers and the weavers, which were basically the two most important professions in India. They still are today. Even today, they are the greatest employment generators, these two professions, which basically completely destroyed both farmers and weavers, so much so that in 1830, William Bentinck had to say that the bones of weavers are bleaching the plains of India. So bad was the position. They had no work. And that was what destroyed the Indian textile industry. So the direct result of this was actually the Swadeshi movement, where people realized that India is starting its own economic ruin by buying foreign cloth. So there were bonfires, and you can see one photograph which says that we cannot take advantage of Swadeshi goods because we are donkeys. There were bonfires of foreign-made clothes, huge bonfires, and the charkha, or the spinning wheel, once again became the most enduring symbol of India. You can see it here. And that was the time India started to slowly reclaim her views. What is amazing is that despite this systematic economic exploitation by the British of India's weavers and farmers, India's weaves still survived. And if you see this map, you can see that from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from Assam and Mizoram and Manipur to Rajasthan and Gujarat, India has a treasure trove of weaves. Different weaves, different techniques, different motifs. It's like every region has its own vocabulary. And today, when the world is talking about slow fashion, when the world is talking about conscious fashion, when the world is talking about sustainability, about managing your resources, what can be the best make in India craft that we can showcase other than India's textiles? Because our textiles are our original make in India craft. And in 2 days, there is going to be the National Handloom Day. I request all of you to include at least one handloom item in your wardrobe starting from this handloom day. This is the way India can regain its Vishwaguru status in handlooms, which is what is the harbinger of India's Vishwaguru status in everything else. Because the story of India's textiles is the story of Bharat. The warp and weft of India is Bharat. Thank you.